So, bom dia, good morning. My name is Fernanda. I'm General Manager of the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce. And on behalf of the Chamber, I want to welcome all of you for joining us today.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce. And we're very happy to be organizing an event in conjunction with IBREI, the Brazilian Institute of International Business Relations Development. IBREI is a non-profit association made up of professionals from different countries with well-known expertise in corporate, legal, and academic areas. Its mission is to improve the international business environment by establishing a bridge to closer alliances and relations between professionals, companies, and institutions, both public and private. To fulfill its objectives, IBREI is focused on facilitating international access to market information and business practices in so many different countries. So the promotion of guidelines to companies, and investors, and professionals who wish to develop business in Brazil, the promotion of information and guidelines to Brazilian companies, investors, and professionals who wish to develop business abroad, carrying out actions aimed at the professional development of entrepreneurs, and the dissemination of relevant and up-to-date information regarding the international market, as well as in promoting business law studies and related legal areas in order to improve the quality of the Brazilian and international business environment.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank the Brazilian American Chamber for receiving us here and organizing this event. Brazil is, maybe most of you already know this, but Brazil is like a sleeping giant when you talk about international markets. The history of Brazil, speaking in internationalization, is very poor. Brazil is a very big country, and mostly when we talk about international markets with Brazilians, they didn't even think about it, or they know just a tiny piece of what the world is. Because when you say, "Oh, let's internationalize your business," they immediately think about Miami, and only Miami, not the United States, Miami and Portugal, and that's basically it. No? And the other way around is also true. Whenever we talk about Brazil as a target of investment, of business to foreigners, usually what people know about Brazil is the São Paulo city and maybe Rio de Janeiro because of the parties, and that's it as well. No? And we have the size of Europe. And so we have many countries inside one country, and there are many different business realities in Brazil that we have this poor history of communicating this to the world.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So it's a pleasure to join with this precious team from the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce, of which I thank in name of my firm, Mourão Campos, to the whole Brazilian American Chamber team. Why opening business in Brazil? Because we are very huge consumers of non-extractive goods. Well, we buy from abroad every time. Those processed products, maybe 89% of everything that is imported by Brazil are this huge number, yes. And this means that the majority of the products imported by Brazil have gone through some production system that has transformed them to other products. So we can figure out the scenario of exportation from the US, for example, to Brazil. This is a number to be explored, and we know that the Brazilian market needs many products that are already manufactured, and also technologies, and also everything that we know that the US market produces.
Okay, thank you for the invitation. To open a business here in Brazil, it's very important to know about our taxation, that most of the time is not a simple task, even for us, because our taxation here in Brazil every time is changing. And then today I'm going to talk about the taxation that we have today and the new tax reform that is being to put in place for the next year. Okay, Brazil is composed by a federal union, states, federal district, that is our capital, and the municipalities. And because of that, since 1898, that was our new constitution, Brazil had more than 550,000 new tax legislation. And today, almost 7% of this new tax legislation are in place. We had almost 40,000 for federal tax, just over 150,000 for state tax, and just over 270,000 for municipal tax. As you can see, it's not easy to follow all taxations that we have. Every day we have new rules, new taxation, and then we need to follow this. And this is a hard work. For federal union, we have income tax, social contribution, PIS, COFINS, IPI, II, and the IOF. All of them are applied on the corporate companies, okay? Income tax and the social contribution they are applied over the profit, and they have the same basis. We have different names for income tax and the social contribution because the destination of those tax. For social contribution, they have one destination according to our legislation, and for income tax, we have another legislation, but the basic is the same. The basic is the profit. We have PIS and the COFINS, that are taxes that are charged on revenue on a monthly basis, and we have two systems for calculated PIS and COFINS. We have one system that is cumulative system, and we have another system that is non-cumulative system. And both systems, they have different rates. And we have more for state, the ICMS. The ICMS here in Brazil is like VAT. And this is applied for goods, and that is for transportation of goods and for importation. And we have for the municipality, the ISS. The ISS is a municipal tax that is charged on the revenues derived from the provision of services. And then as you can see, we have tax for the federal union, you have tax for the state, and we have tax for the municipality. And all of the actors, they can, they have their own to legislate and to apply the tax according to the region that we have here in Brazil. The new tax that we are going to have is a contribuição sobre bens e serviços, called it's a CBS. This is a contribution over goods and services. Imposto sobre bens e serviços, IBS, that's a tax over goods and services. And imposto seletivo, IS, that's a selective tax. CBS is for the federal union, IBS is for state, federal district, and municipality. And the IS is for special products like transportation, education, health. For this kind of industry, will be applied the selective tax, a dual VAT model, one of federal tax, that is CBS and the IS, and the other is for state, federal district, and municipality. CBS and the IBS, they will be subject to the same taxable events. It means that the basis is the same. They will know non-cumulative. Today in Brazil, most of the tax that we have here in Brazil, they are cumulative. And a news that we are going to have is that the billing at destination. Today, the billing is charged when the product is sold. For example, if here in São Paulo we sell a product to Rio de Janeiro, the billing is charged here in São Paulo. According to this new tax reform, the billing will be charged at the destination. And then if a company here in São Paulo sells a product to Rio de Janeiro or to another state, the billing will be charged on the destinate state. The transition period for this new tax reform will be 7 years. The first 2 years, 2024 and 2025, will be the transition period. And then for 2026, the new tax reform will start and will finish in 2033. During this period, the new taxation will be implemented and the old taxation will be replaced. And then for 2033, we are going to have the new tax system fully implemented. The IBS and CBS, the tax rate will be between 25.45 to 27. This is the information that we had until last week. Now that the tax reform are in the Senate, they changed some, they introduced some questions then on the new tax reform, and most probably the final tax rate will be 27.5. This is the major tax rate for this kind of VAT that we have in the world.
Then, when we look to key aspects, it is really crucial just to point out a few key aspects here when bringing that foreign capital to Brazil. Basically, Brazil, I think, was in the past 2 years sign up and change our regulations for final beneficiary aspects. So that's something important to bear in mind when bringing money or goods or making that foreign investment in Brazil. Just a few examples. It doesn't matter if you are a based US company, but if your controlling shareholders or the final beneficiary owners, for instance, a German cooperative or a foundation in Panama or so on, you have to know that now in Brazil with our regulations, at the end of the day, you have to show the authorities the final beneficiary. So if for any reason, for transparency rules, you have a hard time showing that, that might become a problem in Brazil, considering penalties and maybe the suspension of your tax ID not to operate in Brazil. Going forward, we have also, when investing in Brazil, restriction on foreign capital. So basically, if you want to invest in different sectors, let's say mining, oil and gas, broadcasting, those are sectors regulated that you cannot just basically buy any participation of such companies. So, and we're happy to maybe in another day come back here to talk about M&As in such areas, but it's important to know that we have restrictions on that as well. The pre-tax planning, so when coming to Brazil, the pre-tax is really important, and Bruno will just discuss a little bit on that. And when we look inbound in Brazil, we basically have some key aspects to bear in mind, which is the central bank registration. Here is really key. We advise, for instance, H&R Block, Honey Welcome to Brazil, Cushman, KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and so on. And when you bring when those companies are coming with a foreign investment in Brazil, you have to look not only the cash contribution, but are you having IP rights coming, you have service, are you having equipment, and so on. Then that registration to the central bank will be crucial when remitting funds abroad, either to pay the service or to pay the IP rights or to remit dividends. So when registering on our, let's say, our foreign exchange border, when central bank authorities and regulations, it's really important to understand what is coming to Brazil to then be sure that we can return and remit the funds abroad. We have several cases that, for instance, a turnkey to build a plant, we had in the past mistakes when registering that and not splitting the assets, and at the end of the day you cannot remit funds to repay that turnkey project, for instance.
So thank you, Felipe. As you might have noticed, tax is a pretty important aspect in Brazil. Our colleagues talked about tax a lot. I'm going to try to pinpoint the most crucial aspects of getting an investment in Brazil and how to deal with taxes. And maybe the single most important aspect is related to the state VAT, which is the ICMS, because it depends a lot on where your company is incorporated or where the company, if you're doing an M&A transaction, is located, since it's a state tax. So we have different types of taxation among the states, and the states, they provide and they give tax incentives, which generates a lot of complexities for companies doing business in Brazil and might have some risks attached to saying going to São Paulo or going to Rio de Janeiro or going to Minas. Usually companies get tax incentives in the States, and the companies that don't get the tax incentives are kind of in a harmful tax competition environment, since their competitors have some incentives and they don't. So the site location and doing this pre-tax planning in order to invest in Brazil is pretty crucial. There's not a lot of changes, rather you incorporate a limited liability company or a corporation in Brazil. However, where you choose to locate that company matters a lot. And there is even some corporate income tax incentives that are locally given and not federally given. Another feature is that litigation is commonly employed as a strategic tax planning approach. So companies many times litigate and file lawsuits in order to get a better position in some kind of taxes, in order to pay a little bit less corporate income tax or to discuss the constitutionality of certain taxation. So it's kind of different. Brazil has this scenario where litigating proactively is something part of tax planning. And when we look at very hot topics in Brazil now for corporate income tax purposes, a major one is taxing government grants. Just very simply speaking, whenever a company enjoys a tax reduction due to the ICMS incentives, depending on the treatment this incentive is given, it could or could not be excluded from the corporate income tax base. And if you have a company that should be paying 18% ICMS tax and gets an incentive to pay 0, and that difference can be treated as a government grant, you could get a quite large reduction for the corporate income tax. This is under major discussion. The Superior Court of Justice has issued a binding precedent, and I mean, if you guys are working with Brazilian companies doing business in Brazil, this is certainly an important factor as well. So, just to, another important aspect, as Flavio from Modon already mentioned, is tax compliance. We have a very high penalty system in Brazil that could go up to 150% of taxes owed. And also there's a lot of electronic and online tax filings, which, I mean, companies need to invest heavily on people for the tax practice in the companies, and also in IT systems a lot. Okay, so just an overview, I mean, looking maybe at repatriation strategies, how to get money out of Brazil, and a few important aspects here. Brazil doesn't tax any type of dividend, regardless from what type of company it is paid from or to who it is paid to. Dividends are always tax exempt in Brazil. We have the ability, and the law provides an allowance for corporate equity, which is a deemed interest any company can pay to shareholders, and at the end of the day, you can deduct this deemed interest for corporate income tax, which generates a 34% reduction on the corporate income tax base, and it's taxed at source in Brazil at 15%. So depending on how the investor is taxed in their home jurisdiction, it could generate up to a 19% gain if you pay INI, which is interest on net equity, which is this deemed interest. So you could get money out by dividends, which is tax exempt. You could pay the INI, which is a deemed interest, which gives you a tax saving of up to 19%. Usually, I mean, we have shared deals using local vehicles, mainly because of the goodwill that I told. Goodwill is just simply the excess price the buyer pays in relation to the net equity of the acquired target. Very complex thing in Brazil, maybe changing depending on our new transfer pricing legislation and on how Brazil adopts all the recommendations from the OECD, is regarded to taxation at source for services and for royalties. So if a Brazilian company pays abroad services or royalties, there could be up to 50% of taxation on that, made up by corporate income tax, withholding income tax, by several VAT-style taxes that we have. The tax reform on the consumption side might change that. Brazil going to the OECD might change that, and we just have, as Mourão pointed out as well, new transfer pricing regulations that could give some space for international companies to do some tax planning with royalties, mainly to trademarks that weren't available till now. We don't have a tax treaty with the US, that's why what we usually see is US entities investing in Brazil through Luxembourg or to the Netherlands. As Felipe mentioned, usually the private equity industry relies on the Brazilian FIP structure, which is the Brazilian Private Equity Fund. Up until, I think, 2 months ago, whenever a private equity firm was going to invest in Brazil, it needed to set up 3 legal entities, 3 LLCs, in order to invest in this fund. And if it did that, it could get a 0% rate on any return of capital from the fund. So it would be a very good decision to do that for divesting strategies. And usually that's the way they were structured. The legislation just changed, and you no longer have to have the 3 LLCs. You can just invest directly, and you will still get the free, the zero tax on any return of funds from the FIP, private equity fund in Brazil.
One thing just to add what Mauricio said and the folks in the overview, it's important to point out that Brazil, last year, Brazil issued a regulation making our central bank independent. That changed a lot. So in the past year, as other Latin economies, basically was a political body that you could have maneuvers and so on. And now in Brazil, and we had a huge impact on that, because early this year, basically the president wanted to lower the interest rates and not to control inflation. Basically the central bank said, no, I'm independent, I can make my own decision as to flotation of currency exchange and so on. So this is important to point out as to Brazil from now on. And also one question that we received a lot is, what is the role of China in Brazil and how would that impact US companies? So we shared a little bit of, I don't know if you guys have that information, but China just passed the US as to investment in Argentina and in Chile. Still in Brazil, China is the third big investor. But as to Argentina, where we have a huge agribusiness hub, and as to Chile, that is a movement that we've been watching. And at the same time, Brazil has high tariffs for some products to come into Brazil, but at the same time we have treaty with Uruguay to bring products with lower rates if they're produced in Uruguay. And what we've been experiencing is China is now purchasing companies in Uruguay to manufacture the products there. So chemicals, automotive, a few sectors are looking at that as well. And finally, something to watch it, as was mentioned in our presentation, the former government of Brazil did a movement to try to change where money was coming from to Brazil, which is basically US and Europe, and some China as well, but tried to find a different spot, and they aimed for the Arabic Peninsula. So now Saudi Arabia has a commitment to bring to Brazil more than 10 billion US dollars just in the next 18 months. So that's something that we've been watching a lot and experienced that increase of business with Saudi Arabia, which is new to Brazil when you look. And of course we have an oil and gas controlled market and all of that, but basically they are investing in other sectors. So that's something that we've been watching as well.
Well, I'd just like to thank everyone for being here, for your participation. And I very much want to thank IBREI for proposing this idea of doing something in conjunction with the Chamber. I think IBREI and the Chamber have a lot of things to share and can be very helpful to each other. So I'd like to thank you, Mauricio, and thank all of you for being here for this excellent discussion. And we look forward to more interesting discussions, getting more and more detailed. But these are very important things for us to understand. And I'd like to thank you very much. I think unless there are any further questions, if there are no further questions, we can continue afterwards. And I just want to thank you once more very much for your presence.